Hello and good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Varden. I'm Dean of the DNA University, an in-house clinician here at the DNA Company. And tonight we are going to be talking about the DNA diet scam, dangers of oversimplified nutrigenomics when DNA companies of different types getting genetics and saying, hey, look at these genes, this is how you should eat. And where you need to be careful, where you need to say, wait a minute, is this telling me the perfect diet? Can I believe it? I tried it, it didn't work. Or I tried it, it worked a little bit, but kind of confusing. Well, we're going to hash out some of that tonight. And we're going to be talking about why some of those DNA diet kits are not giving you the real in-depth information that you need to have the perfect diet, or to at least be able to eat to your optimal health. And I have a very special guest joining me tonight to talk about this. And I would like to introduce Dr. Carolyn Mine. And she is a chiropractic physician, a nutrition expert, and she has authored and is actually very well known for creating the 25 body type diet system. So we're going to be talking about that tonight. And I would like to say hello and welcome, Dr. Mine. Oh,
Welcome. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and also to be able to share with your audience what I have discovered in well over 25 plus years of practice, and also answering this diet question. One of the challenges that I found in working with patients is, while we have certain things that we know, such as avoid refined sugar and dairy and wheat and with our food additives and the obvious things. But the problem is, what do you do with the specifics? The specifics are, what am I going to eat for breakfast? What am I going to eat for lunch? Can I be a vegetarian? What time of day do I eat my largest meal? And so when you read diet books, what you'll notice is the diet book you just finished contradicts the diet book that you're currently reading. So what do? Where do you go? And what I found is that diet is actually determined by your dominant gland, organ, or system. This is something that you're born with. Bottom line, it's in your DNA. It's genetic. It does not change. And so with that, once you determine what your body type is, then that's when you're at a point of choice. So you can look at, what can you eat when you're at your ideal healthy state? And if your body is really stressed, what can you still eat? So these are just a few of the things that we're going to be talking about and covering today. So welcome.
Well, thank you so much. And if you haven't already, please fill out the poll. We do love to hear from you, get an idea on what your interests are. Where are you in your health journey? So we'll give you a few minutes to get that filled out if you haven't already. And I'm seeing some names that have graced our webinars in the past. I would love to know, if you are new to this community, if you are new to our webinars, please put a 1 in the chat. If you are returning, by the way, thank you. Put a 2 in the chat. I would love to see how our audience is grouped. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Oh, yeah, we've got a lot of return audience members. Hello, everyone. I see some new ones. Thank you so much. So when we think about these DNA diet kits, okay, and they're claiming things like they can reveal your perfect diet by analyzing a few genes. For example, they can tell someone, oh, hey, avoid carbs because you have an FTO variant, or go high fat because your ApoA2 gene is optimal, or hey, look at this particular gene. But the issue with these particular kids, when they say just one gene, making these broad diet claims, is that it's like trying to predict your whole personality from a single text message. And genes don't work in isolation. It doesn't work like that. Really the reality of it is that our bodies operate through networks, not single switches. Nutrition, metabolism, and energy depend on what we call polygenic interactions, meaning a multi genetic networking, okay, that influences these particular aspects and processes. It also depends on environmental inputs, on your hormones, on your microbiome balance. And those things, those genetic tests don't get that information. It doesn't gather that to see the more full picture of who you are. And an analogy you can think of, it's like your genes, think of your genes like musicians in an orchestra. A single gene diet listens to one violin and tries to guess the song. Well, functional genomics, what we do here at the DNA 3 for your DNA 360, and what we do here at the DNA company, it listens to the entire symphony. And we also work in those aspects of environmental factors, your history, your gut biome results, because that can change how your body is reacting to food in a short period of time. Where when you clean up the gut, get it fixed up, you can start introducing and eating foods that maybe you couldn't before. I've had several clients have that happen. So have you noticed, Dr. Mine, where someone is eating something and then you help them to maybe do some therapeutic healing recommendations, and then they were able to reintroduce different foods that were more in line with their body type?
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I have done to address that is to take all the foods and divide those into three categories for what would be your frequently foods. Those are what's your default things you would eat 3 to 7 times a week. Then we have another group, which is moderate. That's 1 to 2 times a week. This gives you a lot of variety. A lot of times these are foods that you wouldn't eat more than a couple times a week anyway. And then we have rarely. Rarely is not never, but it's one that you would do once a month or less. And then I've taken all of those foods and divided those into 2 groups. So one is when you're at your ideal healthy state, and the other extreme, if your body is really stressed, what can you still eat? So both of those extremes are in theory rather than what actually happens. Most people kind of fluctuate back and forth on the healthy side. So when you look at the healthy list, if there's something in there that you personally don't do well with, that's what you're going to find in the rarely group, or you're going to find that in the sensitive list. And with the sensitive list, then again, we have foods that are in the frequently, the moderately, and the rarely, and you'll generally find those foods in the moderately or the rarely category. And that will change. So depending on what's going on, and I know you've all had the experience of when your system is really strong and healthy and everything's working well, you can eat a particular food. For me, it happens to be Italian. But if my system is really stressed, then I have a hard time with the tomatoes and trying to eat a pizza and all the cheese and so on. And that is no way. But I can do it occasionally as long as I'm in good shape. If I'm stressed or fighting a cold or something like that, I stay away from it. And so this is one of those examples of how
Right.
the foods that work for you one day can work, or the next day they may or may not work.
Right. And leaning in on the genes and how that can influence what those foods are. because again, the genes are just one portion, one piece of information of everything else that determines that perfect diet. And this is where we get into the nutrigenomics. So that word, that's you probably are going, well, I've heard of the word maybe, but I don't know exactly what it means. Well, nutrigenomics is also known as nutritional genomics. It's the scientific study of how nutrients and dietary compounds interact with the human genome to then influence genetic expression. It influences metabolism, health, and disease risk. So really, in simple terms, nutrigenomics explores how what we eat affects how our genes behave. So, this is really important. And that is really the basis of what we're going to be talking about. And then how you go from there, what Dr. Mine gets into, which works in with the DNA, but then looking at the phenotype of the person and working in different aspects of their behavior, of their characteristics, which she'll speak into, and which is so beautiful because we can then turn around and look at your genes in like your mood and behavior and say, oh, okay, I do have tendencies toward this genetically, but don't forget, there is the nature and nurture, nature being your genes, but we still are also influenced by the way that we were raised, by our environment, by our toxic load, by all of these different things. So before we get further into more of the fun, nerdy information, I'd like to ask Vanny if you could please bring up the poll questions and we'll go over those. Thank you. All right. By the way, thank you everyone for filling this out. Our first question is, have you ever taken a DNA test that claimed to tell you how to eat or exercise? And over 40% of you said yes, and I did find it useful. And I think that is absolutely wonderful. And I'm glad that you have. Unfortunately, we have 17% said no, but I've thought about it. And no, I'm learning this about it for the first time. Well, this is the time for you to say, maybe I should look into this more. Maybe, this is something that can help me, give me more precise information for myself. And then we do have 11% of you who said yes, but didn't find it as useful. And maybe this is something, this conversation can tell you why you maybe didn't find it as useful. And maybe you can look at it in a different lens, or maybe take a look at some other testing to make sure that you are getting useful information for it, or from it, I should say. All right, our second question is, when it comes to nutrition advice, what frustrates you the most? And I'll tell you, I'm right there with you. Majority, more than half of you said conflicting information everywhere. Yes, it gets very difficult, and that's never going to go away, unfortunately. But I think that the more pieces of information that you learn about yourself that you can start applying, you can start sifting through and discerning the conflicting information, because the information that is out there is to be applied to many different genotypes, many different body types. But which one are you? Who are they talking to? Is what they are saying, X, Y, and Z personality influencer, is that your genetics? Is that your body type? Is that your situation? If it is, then pay attention to that. If not, thank you, move on. 28% of you said not knowing what's truly evidence-based. And yes, I agree with you. And that's something that we work on here and pride ourselves in doing scientific evidence-based research with the information that we provide. 17% of you said diets that don't work for my body. Well, that kind of works into everything else that I was mentioning earlier. And then 4% of you said generic plans pretending to be personalized. And yeah, and this is where that conflicting information that I was talking about, because they are trying to sell to a large number. So it's very difficult to really, truly personalize when you speak to the masses. Our third question, which statement sounds most like you? And this is overwhelmingly, like 70% of you said, I'm ready to understand how my DNA actually functions. So you've come to the right place. Thank you for being here. That was followed up by just under 20% saying, I'm just curious. I want to learn before I test. I like you being prudent. Excellent. And then our tail ends, I'm fascinated by DNA science, but don't trust commercial kits, followed up by, I've tried nutrigenomic testing, but didn't see real results. All right, hopefully tonight you'll understand why. Our fourth question, what do you believe makes a DNA-based health plan trustworthy? Actually, the majority, 75% of you said all the above. So the all the above was backed by peer-reviewed research, interpreted by trained experts, combines genetics with lifestyle factors, and offers continuous updates, not one-time results. And that is something, again, we pride ourselves here at the DNA company, because we do offer that even more precisely within our programs if you work with a practitioner, that we can dive into all of those different aspects. And our final question, what's your biggest question about DNA and nutrition right now? And about 50% of you said, can DNA testing really predict the best diet? And we're going to talk about that some more. Actually, I've already given you some hints on that. That was followed up by just shy of 25% saying, how does stress or sleep affect my gene-based diet? And that is a fantastic question, because those two things very dramatically affect your diet, gene-based or otherwise. Obviously, you want to have that optimal diet based on your genes, based on your body type. But sleep and stress is going to put a wrench in that, no matter what, no matter how perfect you are eating. And that was followed up by, how can my genes explain my cravings or intolerances? By, why do DNA diets give conflicting advice? And then we put other in the chat. And I just want to kind of see what others have sound. Let's see. So it looks like Lisa had stated, it's accurate. Is it accurate that diet changes based on your current health? For example, maybe not ideal candidate for keto, but can this still be beneficial for brain fog and or cognitive decline? Also, she's been told that carnivore can be useful for certain conditions, but not for long-term. Yeah, it does get confusing. And yes, all of these are very good points. Are we at a point in DNA testing where we can say precisely what should be on your plate? Like, you should have 6 grams of baked chicken and, so many ounces of, broccoli, or we're not, it's not that precise. It's more so different types of foods. But again, it also works into beyond the genetics. Remember, I said lifestyle, toxins, microbiome, those are also going to influence your body, your current state of health, the types of foods that you may be sensitive to or not sensitive to that we mentioned at the top of the webinar. Can some of those things be beneficial? The diets that Lisa had mentioned, yes. there can be a therapeutic type diet, short term, to help clear the system of, say, toxins, parasites, anything that could be disrupting the gut biome, to heal the gut lining, then to help repair, so that way you can ease into and lean into your more optimal diet based on your genetics, based on your body type. So let's dive in to a little more detail of that. So, Dr. Mine, would you tell us a little bit about how you determine a body type, and how you believe that genetics influences that? Can you give us an overview on what the body types are that we've been commenting on?
Absolutely. And so I was faced with the very same questions that you are asking. In other words, I was finding when I first started practicing, I could not give people a blanket diet, and the conflicting information from one diet book to another. And so in reality, the person who wrote the book was of one particular body type, and then they would find people with a similar body type, same or similar, that did really well with following that particular diet plan. But then if somebody else was different, that plan didn't work, so they created their own. And so the reality is we actually have 25 different body types, and they don't all write books. So that really leaves you in an area of, well, what am I going to do? So how do you determine where to start? So for women, let's look at weight gain patterns. And for women, we all know where this is. So we will gain weight predominantly. This is our biggest problem area. It's going to be upper body, lower body, or all over. And in working with thousands of women, I have yet to find a woman that doesn't know where that is. And so once we've done this and we've looked at what's your dominant weight gain, and it is possible for the dominant weight gain area to change as your life changes, but it doesn't change your body type. And so where do you,
Well,
yeah?
go ahead. No, please continue.
Or I can give you an example as to how that ended up happening. But when we look at weight gain, the majority of women gain weight in their lower body. And so the first thing that I look at in determining a woman's body type is weight gain. If your weight gain happens to be either in your upper body, that's that basic torso, or your entire body, you have just narrowed down the 25 types into 6 or 7 types. So that's something that you can deal with. You can wrap your head around that. Then the other group is weight gain in the lower body. Next question is, if your weight gain is predominantly in your lower body, where is it? Is it predominantly in your stomach or your buttocks? And so if it happens to be predominantly in the buttocks, now we've narrowed the types down to 6 types. Again, this is something that's reasonable. If it happens to be in the abdomen, then do you gain weight just in the abdomen, or is it abdomen and thighs? If it ends up being abdomen and not thighs, now we've got a smaller group that again we can work with. If it happens to be lower abdomen and thighs, at least now we're down to half of the types. And then we look at shape of the waist, we look at other physical characteristics that we go into. Once we've looked at the physical body, then the next thing is to look at photographs, because you can look at different types and you can see, is this something that looks like, is this type a type that looks like me or not? This one might be, this one absolutely no. So these are one of the things that I'll have people check when it comes to just going through and determining their own body type.
And you know what is really interesting is that your body type emphasizes hormonal, structural individuality. The endocrine system's influence on body shape, cravings, personality, even. And when this is combined with functional genomics, your framework really adds that phenotypic expression of what our genes set the stage for. For example, one of the body types, the thyroid body type, that actually, if you wouldn't mind, can you give a brief example? And then I'll throw in some genes that can relate to that particular body type.
That's a good one that you selected because I am a classic example of a thyroid body type. Identifying characteristics. Weight gain tends to be in the lower abdomen and thighs to more of a lesser degree. And one of the other characteristics is when you look at the hand. And so typically what you'll see is more of a slender hand with long, slender fingers, as opposed to the eye body type that has a broad palm and short square fingers. So the eye and the thyroid are very similar when you look at physical characteristics. The other thing you can do is just look at a person from an overall basis and look at where the dominant energy is. So for example, when you look at me, if I go and cover my eyes, do you still see me? If I look at covering my face, do you still see me? If I uncover my face and cover my throat, do you still see me? This is probably the most difficult thing for people to grasp, but people who are used to seeing energies end up seeing it. So what I have found with the different body types is when you look at the eye body type, which would be more like this, what you see is you see the dominant energy that's right over the eyes. With the brain body type, it's up here. With the thyroid, it's the throat. With the lymph, it's the entire system. So this is one of the things that I was using when it came to discovering the 25 different body types.
Well, hopping back over to the thyroid body type. So we haven't, full disclosure, we haven't done your genetics yet. So it'll be interesting when we do to see if it aligns with how I would look at the genetics when we are talking about thyroid body type, because I would consider that someone who may have a slower COMT, catecholamine O methyltransferase, which takes that methyl group. It helps to clear neurotransmitters. It helps to clear other toxins in the body. Also MAO, that they probably would have slower genes of that. And please correct me if I'm wrong, but these particular body types may need lighter dinners, maybe earlier bedtimes, gentle carbs to calm cortisol. Also, they can be affected by obviously metabolism and circadian genes. So we're looking at the CRY1 or the clock gene. If these are dysregulated, that can actually dysregulate thyroid patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem to align and be correct?
Yes, yes.
So looking at, say, another type, the adrenal, okay, adrenal type. So we're talking more stress, energy regulation. So again, those genes like the COMT, like the MAO, that can affect the HPA axis, hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, where this can affect someone's weight gain, make them be more apt to actually, wouldn't they have more adipose tissue around that central adiposity?
They
Kind of like a
definitely
tire.
do.
Yes. So
I don't know whether
Go
you can
ahead.
see this or not, but these are three types, and those were the three types I started working with when I initially began doing the body type research. And so the one that is here, this one is the adrenal. And you notice the weight gain is predominantly in the torso and right around the middle. And of course, it's right around the middle that we end up with the weight gain because of excess cortisol. And this one over here is the thyroid. And so you'll see the weight gain tends to be more in the lower body than the upper body. And then so we don't
Right.
leave anybody out, this is an example of weight gain all over. This happens to be the pituitary body type.
So this really starts working into knowing what you are more apt to lean in on, when all else fails, or, during difficult times, like, not saying that all adrenal types have this tire, of fat around their midsection. But knowing what the tendencies are and adjusting the diet, the foods, the when they eat, how they're eating, can then return to say, hey, do these things, it will help. So that way you don't have, these particular phenotypes showing up that you may not like so much. So, for an example, say an adrenal type, what would be some recommendations that you usually give for those particular body types?
The adrenal body type is your star dieter. So when you look at the classic idea of what do you do for a diet, it's raw foods, yogurt and cottage cheese, and eat a light breakfast. So that means fruit, or you can do yogurt or cottage cheese if you've got a heavy day. And then lunch and dinner are your largest meals. What happens for the adrenal body type, their ideal breakfast would be steak and eggs. But if they're eating steak and eggs in the morning for breakfast, they are eating all day long. So for them, they need to eat lighter in the morning, and then they can eat later in the day. Um, and so what happens when we look at the diet industry is we said, okay, let's take the people who really have this diet thing down right. So they're the ones that can lose a lot of weight very quickly. And so if we want to lose weight, then we need to eat what they're eating. And so then we had a lot of thyroids and the other types that were very similar in structure. And so what they would do is they followed the adrenals diet, and they lost weight all right, but it was in the upper body. So they lost weight in the upper body and gained it in the lower body, which is not what we like. So then
Right.
the next thing is we came along and said, okay, now what we need to do is we need to add more protein. And so it was, let's do a high protein diet. And we just do protein in vegetables. And that worked much better for the thyroid. And so for the adrenal, again, depends on how much. The adrenal body type, because they are so strong, is one of the types that can be a vegetarian and do very well. The thyroid body type needs more dense protein. So that's why if they're doing fish, they're doing fowl, they're doing a dense protein as opposed to just getting their protein source from legumes. They do much better.
Mhm. And, this really works into understanding someone's genetics to flesh out even more what body type they are. Because
Mhm.
again, going back to that polygenic interaction, that a diet response is really shaped by multiple genes acting together.
Mhm.
I had mentioned the FTO gene earlier, and that's the fat mass and obesity gene. So this is a gene that works in that postprandial information transfer that where the body tells the brain, okay, I'm satiated with the food that I'm eating. Well, when you're dysregulated, there's that delay, and a person can tend to eat more before the information tells their brain going, oh, wait, no, you're full already, stop,
Mm-hmm.
So, understanding tendencies like that, as well as let's start putting more genes in there. MC4R. So this is like a snacking and hunger gene, which works very much into FTO,
Mm-hmm.
in the fact of someone, grazing or snacking or, having that need or feel like they're not satisfied, where FTO is more of that satiation, MC4R is more of that satisfied, like, oh, I may have eaten and I'm not hungry per se, but I didn't feel satisfied with my meal. I need some salty, I need crunchy, I need, something else that they just didn't get. So they will go searching for that to satisfy that quote unquote hunger. Then start tossing in the ApoA2. So ApoA2, this works in with how fat intake equates to fat or weight gain. So, by the way, people, if you are wondering where these genes are located in your DNA 360 reports, I am speaking to genes in your diet nutrition systems report. So you can go into your DNA 360 if you've done it. You can go on the app and look in your diet nutrition reports, and this is where that you will find several of these genes. So another, the ApoA2, again, fat intake to fat gain there's a higher correlation when that gene is dysregulated. TCF7L2. So this gene deals with your insulin response and association to type 2 diabetes risk. For those that are dysregulated, how well is your body managing insulin and blood glucose levels? Because that can affect weight gain, body composition, your brain functioning, gut functioning, if you are not regulating your blood sugar very well. Also, MTHFR and COMT, so your methylation pathway, COMT I mentioned earlier. And there's so many more that can really highlight more detail. It's kind of like, those pixelated pictures that have big squares, a lot of those games. But the more information that image has, those pixels get smaller, so it starts becoming a much more detailed picture. And that's what adding more of these genes into that picture does. It starts smoothing out the edges. It starts refining and giving a much more detailed, beautiful picture. So, for example, because I wanted to mention a couple of these others simply because in our poll questions, people wanted to know, how do the genes and these pathways, how do they work, into my diet plan or the type of correct diet for me? And one of the things when we're talking about things like detoxification, so this could correlate something more like the liver type, body type. How well are your detoxification genes? We're talking about your glutathione conjugation genes, the GST genes. So you will find your detoxification pathway genes in the anti-inflammatory profile report. Okay. And so are you dysregulated? Now, I will be honest, most people are dysregulated in at least one of their detoxification pathways, at least for the hundreds of clients that I have worked with. I've never seen anybody with perfect detox genes across the board. So it doesn't mean that if you are dysregulated in these genes that you're a liver type. Okay, again, we want to zoom out and look at other aspects of it, but they do play a factor. So where the role of these detoxification genes helps to neutralize oxidative stress. Well, that can help to influence the foods that you eat by guiding you to make sure that you are eating antioxidant rich and sulfur nutrient rich foods. Again, based on different aspects of your pathways and which genes may be off. So for liver, would you think that that follows along that mindset area of the detoxification? And would you like to speak into that a little bit more?
It definitely goes along with everything that I have found too. And what I find with the liver body type is the liver is the strongest organ. That's what the dominant organ means. So generally, when you find somebody whose body type is liver, then you will have excellent liver function. It's everybody else that has more difficulty. And then there are 3 types that have difficulty detoxifying. And so because of that, these are the ones who need to make sure that they take as many chemicals out of the diet as possible, just because it's harder for them to detoxify. And those types would be the liver, the medulla, and also the brain body type. So.
Yeah, and when we were talking about hormones play such a huge part in the processes of how our bodies hold fat, of how of the placement of adipose tissue or fat tissue in the body. So this would work into the genes. So if we're talking, say, like the gonadal body type, then we would be looking at the genes of the hormones. And you, again, go to your hormone and fitness report, and it will give you those genes. For example, the CYP17A1. This gene converts progesterone into testosterone. Well, it could be if you have a slow CYP17A1, you may do poorly on low-fat diets because that person can't make enough sex hormones. And especially, and again, I don't want to leave it to just a single gene. There are several genes in this pathway because, yes, you may be slow converting those androgens, but say you clear them very quickly. Well, then you're definitely going to be low on those sex hormones. But if you may clear them very slowly, or say that you convert very quickly to estrogen, well, that's can be a whole other aspect to consider. So what have you found when it comes to women during the transition into menopause, when their hormones are tanking? Does that tend to shift their body types or adjustments needing to be made during that life transition?
Well, your body type is something you're born with, so that does not change. And so what happens when you don't have the hormonal production that you used to have as you're going through menopause, it puts more stress on the entire system, particularly the adrenal glands. And so when the adrenal glands are stressed, then they go into overdrive, and that means hot flashes because the adrenals are into overdrive and they're going to, what do we have to do to produce more heat? And that's when you start seeing things like that. And of course, that's also going to affect the digestive tract. That's why we're getting into this of how well are you able to digest? How well are you able to process hormones? What do you do to make sure you've got the hormonal level up to where it needs to be? So these are all factors to take in consideration.
And I noticed a comment from Sandra. She said, "Where do you see those types?" So I would suspect that you are talking about the body types that Dr. Mine has been actually that she has created, that I have been bringing up. And basically, those body types, like the liver type, or the eye, or the brain, or the skin, or stomach, or all of these other organ body types, they're not in the DNA 360 reports. Those are actually something that she has come up with in her 25 body type diet system. And you can find that on her site. Dr. Mine, would you mind
My
mentioning?
website is bodytype.com. This is different bodies, different diets. There's the book for women. There's also one for men, so we don't want to leave them out. And the difference between the men and women's edition is the photographs. What was amazing is that the diet and the personality profile is exactly the same when you get down to that core level.
Right. And really her framework provides like the emotional and the endocrine context for gene expression, really adding a valuable layer to functional DNA interpretation. The two of them work so beautifully together because you've got the genes, you've got these different aspects that can give you the nuances to say, hey, here's a way of eating or foods to help support your genes so that way they are expressed at their optimum, and then weaving in the body type that Dr. Mine has created to further support that, to give you continued actionable frameworks on which to have that diet or to work that way of eating that reflects and mirrors so beautifully what we can do with your genes, with your functional genomics, because it really is a systems thinking. These pathways reveal the interdependence across detox, hormones, metabolisms, all of the genes that we have been, that I have been commenting on based on the types of foods and leaning into how they can reflect the body types. One of the things that I wanted to dive into a little bit, because I think that it really puts such a wonderful spin and a great perspective in diet, is working in the emotions, the characteristics, the personality. And then I want to weave in some of the genes that can reflect on that personality, a way a person behaves, processes information, etc.
And so while I started by looking at foods, it didn't take very long for me to start looking at the personality aspect. And so we can really divide the 25 different body types into 4 quadrants based on your dominant system and based on your dominant sense. So is your dominant sense mental or emotional? That means when push comes to shove and you're backed against a wall, what do you ultimately rely on? Your head or your gut? And that's not the same as your intuition. And then the next area is your dominant sense physical or spiritual? And if your dominant sense is physical, that doesn't mean that you don't have a strong spiritual connection. It's a matter of which area is more real for you. So where's your energy focused? Do you prefer to have something that's tangible, that you can feel, that you can touch? Is that what makes things real? Or is it ideas and concepts? So when you look at a building, what's more important, the plans for the building or the manifestation and the physical structure that's the building? And so that's going to divide the 25 types into 4 quadrants. And so we look at quadrants. An example is the thyroid body type, which is me. And so my dominant sense is mental spiritual, as opposed to the stomach body type, which is Dr. Laura, and that is mental physical. And so you can even see that when you look at the physical appearance. And so for those of you who are able to perceive that, Dr. Laura has a much more physical, grounded, solid appearance as opposed to me, that where I tend to be more light, like fairy-like, as opposed to somebody that's really, really solid. Not that I'm not solid, not that you don't have a strong physical body. It's just there's a little difference in the way that it's expressed.
Yeah, so one of the things I think it's really powerful linking the emotional and personality patterns with the functional genomics foundation, because when we're talking about different emotional aspects, this psychogenomic pathways, things like the DRD2, which is the dopamine receptor density. Okay, by the way, people, you will find these genes that I'm going to be talking about in just a moment in the mood and behavior reports. So the DRD2, the COMT, again, the clearance of neurotransmitters, BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, working with neuroplasticity, but also can relate to ruminations and the way you process that information and remember information, because it works into dopamine tone, that reward, behavioral reward that can influence food motivation, cravings, stress resilience. And then getting into things like MAO, 5-HTTL-PR. 5-HTTL-PR works with serotonin transport, TPH2, serotonin production, the serotonin balance and emotional regulation that mirror personality descriptions across these body types, and understanding how you process that information, how you can go about realizing what your tendencies are, what your relationship to food is, your relationship to stress. How easily do you become stressed? How do you deal with that stress? That can definitely influence how well you might be able to stick to a particular diet or have different diets introduced. This is very important to understand the way that you process that, the way your genetics are, so that way you can have a more, a better understanding of yourself to make the changes that you want to impact and to have it be a continuous thing, turn it into a lifestyle, so that way you are working optimally. By the way, we are getting a lot of questions. So I'd like to take this moment to hop over to our question and answer. Was there any last pieces of information that we haven't covered that you wanted to talk about or mention before we jump into the question and answers?
Well, the basic area is the main question is, where do you go to determine your body type, and how do you do that? And so you can go to my website, bodytype.com. There's a lot of information there. A lot of times people are able to just go to the website and determine their body type. Sometimes people have a lot more questions or don't really want to explore it in that much depth. And so then there's a test. There's a test for men, there's a test for women. And what the test does is it starts with physical characteristics. Then we start going into characteristic traits. We look at personality. And then from there, you're going to have several types that are close, and you'll narrow those down to determine your body type. Once you do that, then you will have a PDF for your body type profile that looks like this. And that goes into what are the foods that support your body type, going into menu suggestions and ideas. How do you put that together into something that's practical? And then the next area, which is my favorite part, is the personality profile. Personality profile is divided into the essence. Who are you? Characteristic traits. Basically, again, what is characteristic of that particular body type. What motivates you? We're not all motivated by the same thing. If you take the characteristic traits and express those on the at worst, what does that look like? Then there's at best. This is your potential compared to you, not you trying to fit into somebody else's mold. And then the other area, if by any chance you still identify with any of the at worst characteristics, what do you do about it? And so that's when we're looking at core emotional patterns that have to do with your basic life lesson that's also associated with your body type. So if you're experiencing these things, it's not your fault and you're not alone, but this is kind of how do we deal with that? And that's based on my book, Releasing Emotional Patterns with Essential Oils. And so that's how do we deal with an emotional pattern. So an emotion pattern is kind of the idea of anger. We know what that is. How do we deal with it? By looking at what's the other side of the emotion and what do I need to learn from the experience. So again, there's a lot of information on that in more detail. So I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to be able to speak with you and hope to connect with you all soon.
And I wanted to circle back and thank you very much for that. And I want to get into some more of the genes before we dive into the question and answers. So I've been mentioning genes that affect the body, that affect how your body can relate and work with the food. So let's revisit just a couple of them. I want to make sure that we can really zone in on some of these. So when we're talking about nutrigenomic insights, FTO, MC4R, remember these are appetite regulation and satiety. Okay, how well are you doing that? Do you need to start implementing certain techniques so that way you are not overeating? Okay, remember your relationship to food is very, very important, especially when it comes to the types of food that you're going to eat. You need to make sure that you understand, that you don't overeat them. Okay. So knowing those genes, for example, if you are dysregulated in your FTO gene, your MC4R, then you want to make sure to slow down, give your body a chance to feel full. Okay. Stay away from buffets. We tend to eat more if it's not sectioned, if, it's just a free for all. You know how you open up a bag of chips, and if you're eating out of the chip bag, it's so much easier to eat that whole bag of chips than if you take a small handful and put it in a dish and just eat that. So portion control. Other things like the CYP1A2 gene, which is that caffeine gene in the COMT. Okay, this can really lean into caffeine, stress response, and that synergy between them. How well are you clearing the caffeine? How well is that affecting that neurotransmitter clearance for stress, for adrenaline, for anything, especially if you're drinking coffee later in the day and you're not clearing it as quickly? That can affect your levels, your cortisol levels, and your ability to sleep, which can then cause this whole effect, the domino effect of affecting the sleep, which I had said sleep really is that, and stress definitively affect your weight, your body, your weight gain, and the way that your gut, whether it gets leaky gut and you're not absorbing those nutrients from the foods that you're eating, that can be affected. Looking at things like ApoA2, SOD2, okay? ApoA2, remember, is that association of fat consumption to fat gain. If you are dysregulated, you're not going to want to be on a higher fat diet. You've got to watch out. Not saying you don't have any fats. You need to have some fats. You have to have some fats because your brain, you've got to have, most of your brain is made of fat tissue. So you don't want, like cholesterol levels that are, in the single double digits. I mean, you need to have those fats. They are also the basis of your sex hormones. So it's not that you go totally fat free, but you need to adjust accordingly. And your SOD2, that's the antioxidation pathway. Okay, in the mitochondria, how well are you able to get rid of those oxidants? We don't want the mitochondria in the cells to be damaged. They are our powerhouses giving us the energy for all the work that our cells and our tissues and our bodies have to do. So if you are dysregulated in your SOD2, well, then you need to lean in on those antioxidants. Your MTHFR, MTRR, SHMT1, these are genes, there are more in that methylation pathway. Methylation pathway, remember, not just one gene. And this is where your B vitamins, methylation is ubiquitous. It's very, very important to remove toxins for neurotransmitter conversion, for estrogen metabolite clearance, all of these different things. We need to make sure your methylation pathway is working. Well, that leads into the types of B vitamins that you need. That can lean into, hey, do I need to get this from certain types of foods that are higher in certain B vitamins in certain forms? Do I need supplementation to help me out? So again, it's not a single gene that will tell you your diet. You've got to look at all of these different genes and in that beautiful spectrum that they are and how they work together. Remember, this is nutrigenomics. Okay, it's a network, this polygenic network that works together that gives you more of that full picture. All right, let's jump into some questions. So our first question is from Sandra, and she says that my DNA company results show the following: poor response to toxins and proteins, reduced carbohydrates diet, reduced fats diet. What is left for me to eat? Oh, darling, there's a lot. Those are just very general recommendations. Remember, I said in the very beginning, your genes give you a certain amount of information, but there are other factors that influence the foods that you have and the foods that you need to take in, because just taking the DNA 360 test, it does not take into account your history, your environmental situation, burden, your stress levels, your sensitivities, if you've got leaky gut, if you've got, if you're in menopause, if it doesn't take into account any of those things. And this is where I was saying in the beginning about environmental impact, hormones, gut biome, your microbiome situation. All of these play a part into what that personalized diet should look like. And it can also influence your particular body type that Dr. Mine was talking about. So there's a lot for you to eat. When we talk about toxins and proteins, because there aren't any particular types or special genes, at least that research has determined that says, oh, you should have this type of protein over this type of protein, etc. We look at the toxins in the protein, meaning being careful not to have a lot of toxins introduced in the cooking of them. So we're talking about charring, smoking, or otherwise burning your food. Those introduce extra toxins and carcinogens that your body is not able to process out due to your detoxification pathways. For reduced carbohydrates, you probably have an AMY1 gene that's, a bit dysregulated, or TCF7L2, or something saying, don't go heavy on the carbohydrates, because probably, if you've noticed in the past, you probably have gained weight when you have. So doesn't mean you don't eat carbohydrates. We're looking more at starches. Remember, vegetables and fruits are carbohydrates. Those we need, but in which proportions and everything else, this is something where Dr. Mine's body system can actually go even a little bit more into detail about. But knowing that, oh, hey, if your SOD2 is off, then you need more antioxidants. Go for those bright colored fruits and vegetables. Reduced fats diets. Again, that's more of saturated fats, not total fats. When we're talking about what's left to eat, a lot. But this is where I strongly encourage working with a practitioner to be able to tease out all of these other details and taking a look at your history, at your biome, at, these other aspects that influence what you would be eating. And I know that that was a longer answer to the question, but I think it really speaks into a lot of the other questions that people have had and that are also listed in our Q&A. You're welcome, Sandra. Okay, our next question is from Madeline. Do you have to have a specifically developed sense of feeling energy body types, since most people do not feel them? Did you need me to reread that, or can you see the question, Dr. Mine?
Feeling energy types. I think what I was referring to is to be able to see energy or sense energy. And no, you do not have to do that. That is usually something that is developed over time, and people who've been working with energy, a lot of times, this is something that they're very aware of. So it's not necessary. It's not mandatory. First thing we start with is the things that are very obvious, like where do you gain your weight? Things that are obvious physical characteristics. And that can be things like shape of the hands can be one of the things that can be there. Shape of the shape of the head. All of these physical characteristics are the things that we start with. So there's just a number of different entry points. Sometimes I find people will actually enter from the personality profile, from the psychological aspect, rather than even from the physical area. And sometimes it can have to do with foods, like what foods support you, which ones don't.
Thank you. So Roche Paul is asking, will we be going over a sample report? Unfortunately, no, we don't go over sample reports. We didn't, we would have to get authorization for that. But in our DNA University Genomics in Practice webinars, that's the last Thursday of every month, we always go over a case study where we do bring in aspects of that, in which case, yes, there would be a sample report. Okay, so Madeline has another question. How is it possible that an adrenal type feels much better if eating animal protein and vegetables and doesn't get fulfilled by the vegetarian diet?
That depends on where a person's health is. And so the fallacy is we think that the ideal diet, the most healthful diet, is the vegetarian diet. But I find that a person has to have a much higher level of basic health before they can even handle it. And that's true with the adrenal body type as well as other types. And so the food that will stimulate the adrenal body type is beef and also eggs. And so this is why when the adrenal body type is stressed, what they crave is a steak and eggs and salt. So those are the stimulants that the adrenal will express. And so it also works for other people as well. So for the other types, if you find yourself craving salt, many times it's because you're needing to support and stimulate your adrenals. And of course, that can also be true when you're looking at which foods you tend to crave. And so if you're craving dairy, dairy happens to stimulate the pituitary gland. Sugar stimulates the thyroid. So you can look at sugar in a lot of different forms, whether we're looking at sweets or we're looking at more complex carbohydrates when we're looking at things like even rice or potatoes in the vegetable form.
Well, thank you. Barb actually had a couple of comments saying she thinks it's a good idea to take both the DNA 360 and the DNA Gut 360 premium tests. Yes, totally agree. And for those of you out there who don't know, the DNA 360 test is our foundational functional genomics test that tells you what genes that you have that I was talking about in the particular systems. The DNA Gut 360 premium test, this is a gut biome test. This is a stool test. And where the DNA 360 genetics test, that's like a one and done because your genes don't change. You have the same genes from the time you're conceived to the time you die, where your gut biome, that can change over time. So that's more of a test, don't guess. Where are you right now in your life? To provide more information on recommendations on certain bacterium that you may be missing or that you may be high in, pathogenic species that may be higher. So therefore, treatment can be more targeted. So, because she was saying that she had gotten the Gut 360 Premium and found that certain bacteria in her report had to do with liver detox and, these other things. So yeah, it has great information for that. Thank you so much for sharing that, Barb. Another question, George is asking, can body type shape indicate whether the arteries are naturally more tending to be wide or narrow? Also, can genes indicate this? I'm going to jump in and say on the genes can indicate the arterial wall's ability to vasodilate and vasoconstrict. So we're talking the genes of NOS3, your ACE gene. Those two play factors in your body's ability to do that. Whether they currently are is another story. That's where the genes lay the foundation. They tell you your blueprint, but then what's actually being expressed? Because if you're NOS3, okay, nitric oxide dismutase gene, okay, this helps for nitric oxide bioavailability, absorption. Nitric oxide helps with vasodilation. It helps keep the blood pressure lower, okay? If you're dysregulated, you could have naturally higher blood pressure. But if you are doing things, techniques, breathing techniques, taking nitric oxide producing foods or supplements, things that help with vasodilation, then even if you have a genetic, variant of that gene or of the related genes, it doesn't mean that you have high blood pressure, because maybe you're doing something to help that, to minimize the genetic effects. So what you're actually showing right now can be different from what your genes, the blueprint says. So let me kick this over to you, Dr. Mine. Does the body type or shape, can that indicate whether arteries are naturally more tending to be wide or narrow?
I really haven't found that. And so when we're looking at the various different body types, we've got the heart body type. We also have the blood body type. And so blood would have to do more with the entire vascular system. And what I find with the blood body type, I don't see that they tend to have a lot more cardiovascular problems. What happens with your dominant gland, that's your strongest system. But when that strongest system is exhausted and depleted, that's when you can start seeing problems in that particular area. And so that would be one of the things that we want to consider. But your body type doesn't determine whether you have wide or narrow arteries.
Thank you for that. And Maria, you can find out what your body type is by going to her website. And Vanny, I think you can drop that in the chat again. I appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, Angela is saying, let's see, with codominant hormones. Okay, so in a genetic sense, codominant would be androgen or estrogen dominant. So really which way that person would lean is much more dependent on diet and lifestyle. So you can go either way. She says she's 59 years old. It's much harder to get lean over the last 2 years. On bioidentical, or she's on pellets, elevated familial hypercholesterolemia, so higher cholesterol genetically, and she's looking to recalibrate. Weight gain all over, but mainly in the belly and breasts. So, do you have any recommendations of things that she could look into to try?
And so the
Or
first thing
insights?
that I would do is look at what's your body type. Now, the one type that tends to gain weight in their breasts, that's one of the first areas where it shows up, is the brain body type. And that's not the only one. Intestinal body type will also tend to gain weight in their breast. Stomach can too. So it's not limited to just one particular type. But by knowing what your body type is, then you know what are the foods that support your system most. And sometimes they can be things that you wouldn't think of. Like, for example, olive oil. You can look at olive oil as being a really good food. It is for everybody except for the blood body type. And for that one, it creates more stress. Almonds are another good example. And they're great unless your body type happens to be thalamus or pineal. So that's why when you're looking at what are the foods that are stressful foods, they're not always the foods you would think. And many times these are foods that you may eat more often because many times these rarely foods are the ones that are the stimulants. And when your system is stressed, you have a tendency to go to that because you can get an instant response. That's why, like with the adrenal, they crave the steak and the salt. And so that's not ideally what's the most supportive, but a lot of times that will give you that energy lift.
Yeah, and Angela, when you're looking at your genes, this is something that you can even work with one of our practitioners, because I do deal, and so do several of our other practitioners, deal with this a lot for postmenopausal women and dealing with these types of weight gain, is that there are other aspects of your life that can be looked at and tweaked to help with that, looking at your detoxification pathways to see, because you are more susceptible of their influences now that your hormones are a bit dysregulated. I mean, yes, you're taking the pellets, but there could be more going on there. Really looking at the specifics of your diet nutrition to see where you need to lean in on more. Also looking at your sleep, your mood and behavior, okay, to where can you start optimizing your sleep even more, because that's really going to help with smoothing that out and allowing the body for the repair, and also with that weight regulation. So there are a lot of areas that can be addressed by looking at the entire report and also looking at your history and other labs. So that can actually be very useful. All right, so Holly is asking, we were talking about peer-reviewed science, and she's asking, what is the peer-reviewed science behind the body type philosophy?
And so what I've done with the body typing, it's clinical experience. And the body types where I started really looking at this was based on Abravanel's work, and he was taking that from Beeler, and Beeler was looking at the dominant glands, or the strongest glands in the body, being the adrenal, the pituitary, and the thyroid. And so Beeler realized that there were more types than just those three, but he died before he was able to complete that research. And so what Dr. Abravanel had done is he took the three types, the adrenal, pituitary, and thyroid, And he had a weight loss clinic that was up in LA. And so he was seeing a lot of people whose dominant gland was gonadal. So these are women who are very much into beauty and home and what do we end up doing to enhance our physical appearance, also regulated a lot by hormones. And so he added a fourth type for women, but he didn't add that for men. And so when I had a patient bring in a Bravenel's book and I looked at the book, I found this is the first diet book that really makes sense because now we're looking at diets based on something specific, and that's your dominant gland. And we know from all kinds of research that the glandular system is so important when it comes to regulating our hormonal balance and even shape. How does that play out? Um, and so that was really how I started working with this. Then there was also an anthropologist who was in Bethesda, Maryland. And so what he had discovered based on anthropology was he had discovered 8 different body types. And one of those was a type that he called balanced, which meant that there was no gland that was in charge, but it all had to do with the balance between the various different glands. And one of the other glands that he included was the pancreas. So when I looked at that, I was looking at the pancreas as being an organ, but by definition, it secretes. And so if the pancreas can be dominant, why can't the liver or the spleen? And I started working with patients that didn't fit in those particular categories, the 8 categories. And I was finding the same thing with the 8 body types I found with every other typing system, is that there were people that didn't really fit. So then we looked at those and said, well, this is a combination type. I looked at the combination and type and said, no, it just means that we don't have all the information we need. So one by one, I would have people that would come into my office that didn't fit with the types that I had already identified. And I started looking at what is their dominant gland. That dominant gland based on weight gain patterns, what foods support their systems. And that was really where I started with that. So for example,
And
I had a
Dr. Mine,
person, yeah,
yeah, how many, well, only because we're getting close to time
that's
here and I
okay.
have a couple other questions, but how many years have you been in clinical practice?
I started practicing in 74. So
That's
I've
a
hit
lot of
my
clinical
50-year
time.
mark.
Wow, amazing. And I will say that, there's a lot of peer-reviewed science. I mean, actually, all of our information for the genes that we present, it's all based in scientific literature. So, and we've already gone through quite a bit in this webinar associating how the genes work into the phenotype and associativeness for the body types. So thank you very much for that question, Holly. Uh, and a couple of last questions, more to you, Dr. Mine. So if we can do this briefly. George is saying, do the different blood types correlate in any way to the different body types, with certain body types going through specific blood types? So he's talking about Dr. Peter Diodamo's The Blood Type Diet. Are you familiar? Is there any
Yeah, I am familiar with
correlation?
it. And what I find is I do find that a lot of times it can be helpful information, but I find the body typing is more solid. So to give you an example, my dominant system is thyroid. I happen to be an A body type. And so for A, then according to Diodamo's report, I should focus more on carbohydrates. I find if I eat a lot of carbohydrates, it puts weight on me. So for me, I really need to focus on what supports the thyroid, which is primarily protein in vegetables and lighter on the carbs.
Okay, thank you. And last question. Can you have a certain physical body type, but a personality and likes that contradict your dominant gland type?
I have not found that to be true. Now, one of the things that can happen is a person can exhaust their dominant gland to where they start operating on their secondary gland. So that would be where it would appear that they were not operating, that the personality and the body type did not quite fit, but ultimately they do. And so what happens is when people start paying attention to what their body needs and start taking the stress off the system, then the dominant gland reveals itself.
Wonderful. And actually, I did see one other question in the chat that I definitely wanted to answer because it was such a great question. And that this person, I forgot who it was, but they asked, what's a gentle carb? Because I had mentioned that earlier. So a gentle carb is a carbohydrate source that provides stable, sustained energy without causing large spikes or crashes in your blood sugar or insulin. It's gentle on your metabolism, your hormones, your mood. So these would be more low glycemic index foods, high fiber, resistant starch content, nutrient dense, have minimal processing. So we're talking about like sweet potatoes, carrots, parsnip, beets. They're rich in fiber, in carotenoids. They allow for that steady glucose release. Whole grains, okay, wild rice, steel cut oats, amaranth, things like that, because they have that intact fiber and protein balance. Legumes, again, resistant starch, so potatoes, rice, oats, cooking them, letting them cool, reheating them. That's what I was talking about. All right, so we have come to the end of today's webinar. And first of all, Dr. Mine, thank you so much. I really appreciate you coming here and speaking with us about diets, about body type, and how that influences and how personalized you can get. And I wanted to remind all of our audience members that remember that genetics isn't about restriction. It's about alignment. Functional genomics empowers you to eat for your biology, not against it. So with that, I want to say again, thank you, Dr. Mind, for being here. And thank you everyone for joining us this evening. We will see you again next week. Take care.
Thank you for the opportunity to share the information with you.